So welcome everyone to Frontrunners Innovate, where we connect you to global leaders who are all innovating and creating positive impact in the world. Today's guest is Tarique J. Rashaud, and he is the Chief Strategy Officer and CEO of Xemplar Carbon and Capital. And that is located right now in Texas, I understand, or at least he is located in Texas. And his role there is that he works on the global portfolio strategy for developing tech-based and nature-based carbon offset projects at the Food, Water, and Energy Nexus. Tarique is a global carbon market advisor and someone we want to gain some insight from today. So helping me to do that is our co-host, Ambassador Richard Swett. And Ambassador Swett has served the U.S. at Congress and conducted his diplomatic service as an ambassador to Denmark from the United States. So we appreciate you both. Right now, I want to say, Ambassador Swett, we want you to talk about your CEO and founding role at Climate Prosperity Enterprise Solutions, which directly relates to what we're going to be talking to Tarique about today. So why don't you introduce yourself first, and then we'll
thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to meet you, Tarique, and more importantly, great to have this conversation with you. I have actually got some connections down in Houston and in the energy business down there that you may know. I have classmates who are operating in Houston in the energy business. One is Ed Hers, who's been very involved in the oil fields and oil businesses down there. He's an economist by training and works on understanding all the economics of the business. But I also, when I served in Congress, I had a absolutely stellar energy guy who handled all the legislative work that we did in the energy business. And there are lots of stories to be told, but this is your interview, so we're going to save my stories for another time. But his name is Kurt Johnson, and Kurt has been for over a decade working in the carbon in the carbon stock area, figuring out what the carbon credits are worth, and doing all that kind of work. So I'm very eager to hear your approach on that, based on the experience I have with Kurt and the work that he's done there. I've also served not only in Congress, but I was an ambassador in Denmark for a spell. And what was useful there was Denmark is one of the few countries that has a very holistic view of how they intermix architecture, society, energy, all the components that make up for successful communities. They do a pretty good job of that. And I, as an architect myself and as an ambassador, I got to see a lot of that, not only in action, but how they came to understand what that action should be. And they had what I think we should have, which is a design review committee in the legislative process that I thought originally was just looking at the built environment, but it's actually set up to look at how everything integrates in the legislative process in order to have the highest and best impact on the greatest number of people in the community. And to me, that is something we lack terribly, because we are a two-party system and winner take all, and it's never something that creates the best result for everybody. And so that caused me to write a book called Leadership by Design, which is using the architects and the design process for decision making, which puts one individual in charge of the whole group, if you will. But at the end of the day, everybody's got to have a say in how that final decision is made. So that's really my background. And you'll hear a lot of the questions that I have coming at you from that perspective. It's an honor to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Man,
Thanks. Appreciate that. Well, we're on to you, Tarique. What I always like to start with is a little bit of background and what brought you into the work that you're doing. So if you'll share a little bit from that perspective.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Mary, and thanks for that context, Nick. Yeah, Tarique Rashaud, CEO of Xemplar Carbon and Capital, based here in Houston, Texas. And I guess I want to say my background, or at least the ethos that drives both myself and Xemplar Carbon, is very similar to yours, Dick. Came into the industry, and I'm going to date myself a little bit, maybe 35 years ago, straight out of college with the usual players, General Electric on the combined cycle side, then went on to the competitors of Sierra Brown Boveri, and really kind of focused on building out the infrastructure for combined cycle power plants and things like that. But the last 15 years or so, I've been focused on sustainability finance. And basically what that is to make sure these very impactful projects are bankable. Because whether they like it or not, they have to pencil out. But my ethos, I like to say, I was born and raised in Port Arthur, Texas. Typically known, and these are the EPA's words, not mine, as what has been historically a sacrifice zone in regards to the amount of emissions and things like that that we really have to deal with growing up there, and of course some high prevalence of all the health effects that go along with that. So the opportunity to come in from energy perspective and be part of the solution, if you will, in some of these historically disparate census tracts is something I can turn away from, and I've been really blessed to be able to engage. But I'll tell you this, Nick, where if I could share this, what I've seen, thankfully, because of the multimodal nature of climate impact and things like that, there's been more of a lean to go from siloed approaches to systems approaches, because there's a need for multimodal challenges or multimodal solutions. And that means you have to collaborate with the architects. You need to collaborate with the stakeholders within the community. You need to collaborate via public-private partnerships with some of those public-side stakeholders and private stakeholders to make sure we're all sort of stewards of that particular environment. So that's sort of me in a nutshell personally. But from a business standpoint, very active here in the U.S. But I think the crux of this conversation, we're very active in sub-Saharan Africa and along the lines of internationally transferable mitigation outcomes and leveraging those to help fund some of these projects.
Great. Well, the first question that pops into my mind is, you sound to me like my kind of guy, because essentially what I'm listening to you say is that you believe that systems have to be balanced, that we have to do things in a transitory way, that we can't just abruptly stop one and go on to another. And so, that's the big problem that I see in the environmental sector right now, that all the the brainiacs that are, fighting for a clean environment think that they can do this all by shutting down the fossil fuels and turning up the solar and wind turbines, and everything's going to balance out. And with no nuclear and none of the other things that are part of that mix. And I've been working for the past 12 years trying to build new communities in Africa that incorporate all of those things. I'm curious to hear from you. How do you use the financial aspects of the carbon credits and their value to help to levelize the load and to make these kinds of projects more profitable?
Absolutely, and thanks for that, and thanks for noting a truth that I think is becoming more and more apparent post COP28, is that this energy transition has to be exactly that, a balanced transition and not an energy revolution. We're going to have to work hand in hand with some of the typical players, whether it be oil and gas, et cetera, and come up with a solution that's good for the environment and good for all stakeholders. Because those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive as long as we're doing this, right? And so where the carbon credits or the carbon markets come into play, and chiming in on something you said earlier, sometimes it's not realized that since the onset of the Kyoto Protocol and CDM mechanisms, things like this, this isn't really new. It's the leveraging and optimizing these things is new, and through the voluntary carbon markets, which kind of goes back to, and I'll use Africa for example, in some of your questions regarding how do we meld them together. The good thing is about a lot of the African countries now, they're being very forward with those private sector companies or international players that come in and engage for foreign direct investment or infrastructure building to make sure their local content policies are met or adhered to, meaning the goals around building capacity, that goes around making sure those social economic impact in some of these projects. And hopefully, grand scheme of things, even if there's a build, operate, transfer, where those players that we kind of buttress in the experience doing the build out, eventually doing the O&M, we can transfer this over to that particular country so that they can be self-sufficient, right? And here's where the carbon markets come into play. Obviously, every country has naturally determined contributions, primarily under the Paris Agreement. So we leverage that because in those NDCs, invariably, there are always goes around green infrastructure, whether it be solar, bioenergy, hydro, etc. The good thing about the carbon markets is that for a project, let's say a solar project, and if we're talking one of the methodologies, let's say Vera or others, if we're building out a solar infrastructure project in a particular country, that project in itself, technically, great. It's going to have GHG reductions. It's going to lower the amount of energy poverty and energy access. Going to bolster the energy access, and that's great. However, and of course, with that, a certain amount of RECs and carbon credits that can be generated from that. However, if that same project meets certain criteria with CCBS, which is a biodiversity standard, ST Vista, which is a sustainability standard, if that same project meets those criteria to make sure there is capacity building, there is sustainability involved, there are some metrics met around biodiversity, maybe it's agrivoltaics or some co-siting. Now all of a sudden the carbon credits generated from that, the valuation of that credit on the voluntary carbon market, it goes up a bit because now it has an actual impact that's tied to that project. And so if there's a offset purchasers on the voluntary carbon market side, a lot of those large offtake purchasers, I use Shell or others, for example, they also have ESG or CSR goals, that they have themselves. So if they're going to invest or purchase those offsets for their scope 3 or what have you, they say, you know what, that's great, but we would prefer a particular project that has all this other socioeconomic impact that aligns with their materiality when it comes to CSR, et cetera. So now you have an increased value. So now doing good, so to speak, there's actually an incentive for having those impacts and not just doing those particular projects alone. And that's the voluntary carbon market.
No, that's great. And you're talking about how those carbon credits can expand and increase in value for new technology and the good things that are happening. Let me go on the downside of that. We're working with a technology that we call a prosperity platform, where we're modeling our communities in the computer before we actually build them out. And we're finding that we can save 20% on construction costs, 50% on energy usage. And this is all utilizing state of the arts, just my political background, state of the art technology that is 3D animation. And we can put the architect's drawings in there, the engineering drawings, all of the economics into that particular community, and we can model that. Now, what we're finding is that, for example, on the LEEDs buildings, the leadership energy and environmental design, the LEED scores of gold, platinum, bronze, etc. We're finding that the built building is actually not up to the snuff of what the architect said it was going to be, because what's happening is during the construction phase, they're losing track of what the contractor does with regard to the materials and the orientation and all of the things that go into the construction of the building, not what's on the drawings. So you're gonna see through your credits, you're gonna see credits that have been given to three-dimensional structures, buildings that are being built, that, oops, they aren't going to be worth as much as you originally thought they were, because that building is not performing up to the level that it was originally spoken for, or the designer said it would, in fact, operate. Now, I think that's only going to be a sort of an adjustment period, because eventually we're going to capture all of these buildings. We're going to be able to understand what their leakage and what their inefficiencies are, and we'll correct those things. But I liked hearing you talk about the fact that these credits are malleable and expandable, and as I say, contractible, but they are able to move with the market, with the performance, and so they're going to be much more accurate with regard to the overall condition of carbon capture and carbon credits and so forth. So I think that's all to the good.
No, I agree 100%, and I'll tell you why, Richard, and now allow me to get to the international transferable mitigation outcomes later, but I want to speak to something you just brought up. Because I think one huge value in your platform addresses a pain point that really has gotten a lot of justified press negatively over the last year via Guardian report regarding the actual baselining, if you will, of some of these projects and what it found after it's time to do your first true up or measurement. And I think this is why platforms that you just described are so important, because you want to make sure if there's a pre-purchase ex ante by a particular buyer and said, okay, we're going to pre-purchase the carbon credits for this particular activity. We're going to give a percentage of that to the developer for the front end development. That's based on that, whatever baselining or design of that front end, that number. Now, in that process, there's a buffer account, right? For some of these things that may happen, but what has happened without platforms like you're describing is that, especially if you're talking anything nature-based, is that baselining has had some holes in it. Either one, it wasn't done properly, or to your point, it maybe wasn't done the most effective way, right? And what you're bringing is a platform that can not only technically can be used in the building and design space, but that framework or that thought can be applied to nature-based solutions, some of the other challenges to some of the others as well, because what that does is increases the veracity and the confidence that the buyers have in that particular project, in that particular carbon credits. So that is extremely important, and this is why you may have seen a lot more conversation post COP27 around strong MRV, strong measurement and verification, strong baseline. We have to have it. Or if you don't have it and you lose confidence in the market, then there goes that particular opportunity that you have. So it behooves us to engage, firms like yours, Richard, because whatever the front end costs, you're going to gain it back because now you have confidence in every single particular project that I baselined it properly. I made sure everything that we said we were going to do was done. And also you have a way to track, and hopefully you capture a lot of this on blockchain, so it's immutable and transparent, to actually track those contractors. Because Richard, a recipe is one thing. The way the plate comes out after you mix that good gumbo up, it may come out a little different if you didn't have control of the chef and the ingredients that he's putting in throughout the process. And that's what you guys are.
That's exactly my point. And two things come to mind off of that. One is we also use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as the 17 criteria. We actually have added 3 additional criteria that have to do with ownership. So we're in Africa, we're over there putting ownership in at the base of the economic pyramid. That gives the people a piece of the action, skin in the game, if you will. And so that puts us up to 20 of these development goals that are so important. But the other thing that I think is very important is that we're actually right now working on the Tagula College in Jackson, Mississippi. And we're modeling them. We're about halfway through modeling that entire campus. That's a traditional, historic Black college down in Mississippi. And I think you need to be a part of that team, because we need to be evaluating the credits that that college is going to be able to access because of the modeling that's being done. And so I'm going to come back to you, and we're going to talk about how that might be a way for us to do the first job together, which would be a really wonderful opportunity to help this school figure out how to clamp down on their energy costs and increase their awareness and actually their position in the marketplace of being a forward-looking, proactive, environmentally secure kind of community and institution.
I'm so glad you brought that up, and kudos to you for that engagement. I mean, obviously, I'm an HBCU grad, undergrad from Prairie View A&M University, and I sit on their industrial advisory board. And through the U.S. Business Council for Sustainable Development, I'm on that executive committee. We engage HBCUs and MSIs in a lot of our activities, in particularly, and you just touched on something, Richard. As you know, there are goals for the HBCU ecosystem to become more sustainable, right? To become more I want to say, involved in some of these new processes or new markets, or make sure the students are ready. Now, here's the advantage in that engagement. I would love to get involved. A number of our engagements that we've engaged with Prairie View A&M University, or whether it's Arkansas Pine Bluff, we look for opportunities in some of these private sector kind of engagements, is to make sure some of the students are involved, so that this is sort of act as a practicum to buffer, whether they're architect majors, whether they're computer engineering majors, whether they're mechanical engineering majors, to buffer their oncoming senior project, or make sure because I guess, I think you really nailed something, especially in architecture, and we've seen this. And by the way, Prairie A&M won that AIA competition a couple of years. It just had to come out. Yeah.
The solar decathlon.
The solar decathlon, and also the design a couple of years ago, sustainable design by the AIA. It won it for a project in Fifth Ward, Houston, for the best design. But I say that to say this. What we're seeing is an opportunity for architecture, engineering, and even in a lot of cases, business and computer engineering, for those departments to actually talk, right? And whereas sometimes there's these silos because everyone has their research, everyone wants to make sure they get their pockets, but like what you just described, I mean, how are you going to, if the front end of the scope is that sustainable design, is a school of architecture, there also has to be an opportunity for conversation with the mechanical engineering because of the heat transfer, et cetera, and advantages that may be there. And if we're getting to the point of sustainable, like you say, sustainability by design, we talk about materials. Some of these forward-thinking materials that's being utilized, for instance, hempcrete, et cetera, and being in place, so you can really kind of make that entire envelope more sustainable. Now, architecture and engineering are talking even more than they normally would. So it would be an honor to be engaged and really kind of maybe pipeline onboard you guys in some of the existing projects we have there as well.
Well, I'm gonna put you on the spot then, because in the whole the whole history of the COP conferences and what we've been watching, no one's ever met the goals that they've set out for. And one of the things that I've always argued is that architects should be paid not for the service of producing the drawings for one building. They should be with that building for the building's lifetime, which is obviously going to be longer than their lifetime. And that pay should be based on the performance of that building. With the kind of prosperity platform that we're putting out, we're going to be able to achieve that kind of tying in of performance with how it looks. And if you're much of a architecture devotee, you'll recall fondly Louis Sullivan's famous quote that form follows function. And he, of course, was the teacher who taught Frank Lloyd Wright. I'm going to just get this phone.
So while he's getting the phone call, I want to say this. This is amazing that you're talking about the historically Black colleges. The last interview I did was with Larry Griffith, and he's the Executive Vice President, Programs and Student Services at UNCF. And yeah, and we've been working, myself and my business partners, we've been working with UNCF for the better part of the last 2 years.
Okay, well here, now I'm back. I'm gonna put Tarique on the spot. So
there you go. Go ahead.
if you consult in these projects, do you get bonused for having the project exceed your predictions and expectations? How is your pay attributed?
Okay, we're going business model here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm getting to the nitty gritty. I'm saving myself the first 10 minutes on our call when I call you back afterwards.
Right. Right. Well, obviously, and I'll give you two examples.
Okay.
Ways, right. Okay. Since we started the conversation around carbon credits, and we talked about what would happen if it doesn't have the permanence that we thought would happen, and the buffer pool that may be there for that. But on the other side, let's say it overperforms. So if we have a carbon credit management agreement with that particular developer, now there's even more carbon credits that are available to sell. And so from that transaction, that gives us more opportunities to generate more revenue. Now let's tie it back to the US, right? And kind of harking back to the interview that Mary had with great friend, colleague, Bill Shelton. Bill operates in that sustainability the renewable energy infrastructure for solar and really some other technologies as well.
Microgrids.
Microgrids, the whole nine, building envelope. And I think the opportunity, when you say it should be there for architects, let's go back to that building again, is when we partner with Bill, let's say if the project, we originate a project, and it may be for building envelope, whether it's lighting retrofit, envelope measures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, there's going to be a reduction. Now, if the contract is structured as an ESCO, as an energy service contract,
right,
then there's that opportunity. And you just brought something else up, and I'm ashamed because I got some of my closest friends architects that I haven't really thought about is why wouldn't, similar to the energy companies that's, it's going to benefit in that ESCO project based on performance, why wouldn't the architect not be along for the ride across the value chain, across the life cycle of the project?
I have been fighting that fight for the last 30 years. When I got into Congress and I saw that, when I got into the profession and I saw that all I was getting paid for was to create a set of drawings for one structure. And then I gave it over to the contractor and I lost control of the thing. I thought, how in the world can I get more money out of this if my building performs better than what I designed it to perform? Right. And that's I think one of the biggest problems that the profession of architecture has not confronted in its history. And so I think this is an opportunity for not only you to benefit by performance, but for the designers to benefit by performance, and then the contractor too. But everything right now is driven by who puts the most money on the table, and that's the contractor or that's the owner. But the guy or the people who are thinking about how the design will work, how will it perform once the machine is built, they've got to get in, and everybody's got to be in. And it may not be a lot of, and it may not be a big payout, but if you do it on every building for over several decades, it'll amount to something. And it's well worthwhile, and it's worth being incentivized in that way.
Yeah, and you nailed it. I think it's about incentivization, right? And if we're going to a model that we've seen industry kind of move to over the last 10 years, that collaborative model, shouldn't all the stakeholders be incentivized? Equitably, may not be equally, but equitably, like you said. And for those of us that may be, like you said, obviously the people who put the most financial skin in the game, okay, obviously you guys get the lion's share.
Yeah.
However, it will be still valuable to that complete team, which includes the design team for architecture, because that's one project. But let's see if we do 10.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden, incrementally, that revenue stream of what you're looking at in a particular quarter, so to speak, not only is it a stream that wasn't there before, but now it's quite considerable. And guess what? Now everyone has not only skin in the game, but interest to stay with you for the next project. And you can kind of glean from the best practices from the other project, rather than engage a new designer, engage a new architect firm every time you go. So no, I love it, and I'd like to challenge you if you don't mind. Kind of touche.
Okay.
The projects that pretty I want to say most pending, closest pending in Sierra Leone, we have an opportunity to kind of define the scope of those projects. We know it's going to be energy infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. But in that play that we have to also look at sustainable buildings, either from greenfield on or those existing. How about engaging and partnering and make sure we deploy that particular platform and use as a success case, right? Success case in that region that could be deployable as the knowledge transfer back here in the US to prove that the model works. And if you're game, I'm game.
Okay, challenge back to you. Go to my website. You'll see exactly how we approach these projects. You want to look at the Malawi project icon and go down to the 4-minute video. It'll tell you how we put these projects together. But they need to have you in there determining what's the carbon credit and how can we make them better, and what we'll do is at the end of the day, we'll be measuring them. You'll be using our platform to measure every aspect of it to give you the best advantage, not only in determining what the credits are, but in maintaining their highest value.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you why that's so valuable, because before I forget about the ITMO side, if we don't really shore up that complete life cycle of a carbon credit project, make sure that MRV is strong, and also the other things I've talked about, making sure all stakeholders are incentivized to do the right thing and make sure we hit those metrics that we have. We're not going to have the best players at the table, and this is why this is important for ITMOs. So, as you guys may know, under Paris Agreement, Article 6.2 in particular, it affords the facilitation of bilateral agreements and transfer of mitigation outcomes between countries. We've been involved with a number of projects, in particularly one in Mozambique, where that particular agreement was signed between Switzerland via the Click Foundation and Mozambique. And this particular project is a solar project, but they went into a bilateral agreement for ITMOs with Mozambique. Now, here's why that's very important. And again, trying to go from silos to systems. Yes, that's a solar project that's kind of tied to really kind of telecom, where you putting up these towers, et cetera, and it has some advantages for the energy access for some of the rural communities, 100%. But another piece needs to be, because it aligns with Mozambique's NDCs, is to look at the buildings in those areas, not only those that are going to be constructed, but those existing buildings. And from an architecture standpoint or design standpoint, how can we better impact those, right? How can we look at the design or any modifications or expansions that may happen? How can we make sure we also capture that energy efficiency measures and the reductions there? So you're not just going in solar, generating more power, but now you're going to use it more efficiently because of some of the things that you talked about. Now, the good thing is about the international transferable mitigation outcomes is all that can be captured under that program. So what happens is solar developers and the developers for energy efficiency, that can be aggregated into a grouped project. And it's better to do group projects because the transaction costs are lowered versus just project by project. But if you do it as a program, Now you gain those advantages. So now we have more firms like yours involved on that side, and now that's a greater reduction. And now that's the ability for the purchasing country to say, oh, okay, we're looking at you guys have a very strong pool of carbon credits. We agree with the veracity of the methodology that's going to be used to verify them. And now we're going to go ahead and say, we purchase them. We want the outcomes of these. We're going to donate X toward the front end of it, right, of that project for development, et cetera, et cetera. And now you have a way to get those funds to really gain some more traction if a private investor wants to come in, because now you essentially have a revenue model, right? That's firm, that's in place. Or you can have opportunity for blended finance with ADM and some of the others. But at the end of the day, you have something replicable that you can go from country to country that doesn't just attack solar, doesn't just attack hydro, but you're also attacking those building assets as well to make sure we have efficient use of power. And now all of a sudden, more of these countries can engage in these type of bilateral agreements through the international transferable mitigation outcomes, get funding and foreign direct investment, which is greatly needed in these developing countries. And it makes sense for everybody involved, because like you said, everyone is participating equitably in the outcomes, in the revenue generation, in the project.
So here's what you understand that very few other people do. And for the last 12 years, I have been fighting this battle. When you build a solar project and you put the solar panels on stands and they stand there and they create electricity, you've done a good thing and you're generating electricity, and that's all wonderful, but you've generated no jobs for people to pay for that electricity.
Yep.
And you've put structures up that could have been built into walls of housing. It could have been built into walls of retail shops. It could have been built into walls of manufacturing or greenhouses. But so you've had all this single use structure and single production going on that people can't afford because they don't have a job to pay for it, and it doesn't put a roof over their head. It just puts a solar panel out in the field, and that's about all. So what you're talking about is the same thing you talked about when you were working for GE and back when you're in your early energy days. You were doing cogeneration, you were doing combined cycle, you were doing everything that had to do with efficiency. And that's what we do as integrators, is we make everything more efficient by integrating 2 and 3 uses as opposed to just 1 use. And that's a big important thing. And when we went to the World Bank about 6 years ago, maybe it's going on closer to 8 years ago, and we told them, this is all what we want to do, and they sat there and they scratched their head and they said, so you want to build houses? I said, no. Because if you build houses, the people don't have a job, they can't pay for the house, they start cannibalizing the plumbing, they cannibalize the copper, and they take that down to the scrap pile and get enough to put food on the table. I said, okay, you want to build an energy project? I said, no. They said, okay. They said, so you want to build a enterprise, a small business project? I said, no. And they said, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, I want to do all of it all at once. And they said, oh, well, we can't do that. We have this silo for this, we have this silo for that. And you, my friend, are one of the people who understands you cannot silo the development of a community. That community may start out as a corn growing in the field, and then 2 people get together and one guy has a little extra corn and he gives it to the other guy who gives him, shells or whatever in return. But what we're doing is we're building economic engines that are multifaceted. And I like to say, these are sort of like mutual funds. You have a whole bunch of stocks. So if one does well and another one does badly, they kind of balance each other out. And this is what we've got to do with these communities. And you're thinking about that, Tarique. You're onto that. And there aren't many people who are, although we're getting close and we're beginning to meet more and more people like you who understand and agree that this is how you go about developing new communities in places like Mozambique or Malawi or, Africa, but you can do it in our own country. We've got the Deep South Delta region. We've got, the Appalachia. We've got the Native American reservations. There are any number of inner cities. You bring in an economic engine and you put that there, it's going to attract people and they're going to become, and you give them ownership. And they have an incentive to get up in the morning and go out and do what needs to be done in order to put food on the table, but also to grow their share. And that's what we have demonstrated to people, is that there is no ability for people to gain credit off of a salary. But if you give them a piece of a business, you give them ownership in their home, they can build equity there, and that becomes their credit that they can then use to start their own business. And that's what we're trying to do.
No, I tell you, I'm glad you said that those models are translatable, not just in developing countries, because it's similar to a conversation I had with colleagues from the DOE. As we know, there's, thankfully, DOE has a lot of IRA tax credits in some of their programs, 48C for the energy communities, but also 45B for hydrogen infrastructure, and on and on and on. But one of the best portions or variables within those rubrics, within those solicitations, it's going to end up really fueling what you just described, Richard. And that's the piece in there. Not only in that particular response to those solicitations is there a requirement, obviously, to prove out the technology and make sure you have site control and all these good things and the outcomes that they're looking for. But it also has to have a community benefits plan with every single last one of these awards that we've seen for 100 million, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is what this has done. It forced, I don't want to say made, it kind of forced the private sector players to reconsider thinking about the benefit.
Uh-oh, he froze.
Give it a second. Yeah.
Okay. You'll cut this part out, I guess.
It happens sometimes.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, I hear him.
Oh,
Tarique, you froze for just a
you're
second.
back. Okay,
You're
good.
back. Yeah.
oh, my bad. Sorry about that. Should I get back some bandwidth?
No, just give back some information we lost.
Yeah, let me see. Don't know where I stop, but the tax credits through the Inflation Reduction Act, right?
Yep.
Particularly with the DOE, whether you're talking about 48C for energy infrastructure or bioenergy and energy deployments in energy challenged census areas or energy communities, or if you're talking about 45B, the incentives for tax credits for hydrogen infrastructure. The good thing is, every single one of those particular solicitations, to score highest on the rubrics, you must have a community benefits plan that shows as part of the proposal response that you will affect the community by this. This is how 40% of the benefits will be transferred to those communities.
Yeah.
And the good part of that is this: the community engagement piece is no longer the afterthought once the project is almost done or toward the end. It's
No. They're in the beginning.
It's supposed to be in the beginning. And I tell you, that piece has increased the amount of activity and discussions and engagement with the port authors, or with Mississippi, or with Alton, Illinois, or Cairo, Illinois, or with some of the parts of Nebraska in the heartland. We have these rural communities because it has to hit those census tracts, right? It has to have to engage those census tracts. So what has happened, I think, is an ability to kind of learn from what we saw in the local content policies in the developing countries where this has been required. Because sometimes people think the knowledge transfer will transfer from developed countries to underdeveloped country, but in some areas, that knowledge transfer is a double-hinged door, right? And that's how we can learn that and deploy some of that in these community benefit plans to make sure that, hey, we saw this same model that Richard used in Malawi. Very similar. How about we
Tarique,
engage them in this particular project?
Tarique, we started trying to do this in the US first. And the building industry and the way our country is set up is so adversarial. People were not willing to integrate, they were not willing to work together. And we ended up, as I said, 12 years ago, going overseas, going to Africa. Now, of course, there was a lot of learning curve going on there. But look, it's the way you do it. And over the time, we came to understand you got to be careful about corruption. You got to be careful about inefficiency. You got to be careful about Africa time, whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, if you can prove it there, you can prove it anywhere. And my bet is it'll catch on like wildfire in the US once we've shown that it actually works in Africa. And that's the way that I look at it. And I get a little bit of exotic travel mixed in with it to make it more interesting.
Oh my goodness.
I like that.
Yeah.
model.
Well, guys, we're running out of time, but man, what a conversation this is. And I feel like there's much more that needs to happen with this.
Yeah, I'll be calling you. No
Yeah,
question.
oh, absolutely.
I got to get on. I got another project I got to get done for Mary. Otherwise, she's going to smack
Yeah,
my
we
hand
need
and
to
say,
talk.
I'm not focusing.
Yeah.
So
For sure. But I think one of my takeaways too, Dick, as he was talking about from project to program, and that end of the conversation kind of hit home with me, and how that simple mindset shift and where you go with that, and that whole context is really important, because then you start to get into the sweet spot that you're talking about, where the growth of the carbon credit and everything else that's good can help you. So what I'm going to say is stay with me just a second, and I'm going to say goodbye to everybody else and say thank you, first of all, to both of you for your time and this wonderful, rich conversation, because wow, learned a lot. Had no idea that this level was there or reachable. And I'm sure, Dick thought the same thing, maybe, that, wow, this is a whole new, plate that's been opened up for us.
all I know is this is another introduction by Mary Kurek, and it's going to prove to be a great one. So
Mary's reputation.
I'm just going for the flow.
Yeah, Mary's reputation is well earned. Everyone told me she bats 1,000.
Oh my goodness. Oh well,
But it's been great, Dick.
So this is gonna be fun.
We'll talk again. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll say goodbye to everybody else. And then if you're watching this on any of the wonderful places that you get your podcasts, go to frontrunnersinnovate.com and you'll get this interview and LinkedIn profiles and bios and everything on these two gentlemen, so that you can reach out if you want to. So until next time, happy front running. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.